Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing all right. Still trying to get my bearings after being all over the map for a little while there.
Yep, a lot of traveling for you, which is
definitely incommunicado. It took me a day and a half to figure out who won the conference championship games.
Yeah, you were out in the wilderness, which is part of the reason that, apologies, this episode is coming later than we normally do during the week. This is coming at the end of the week. Normally we try and get them out Wednesday or Thursday to you as we do these off-season pods once a week. We're still getting it in right under the wire, right before the Super Bowl, Saturday evening.
And also for the week.
So we're getting it in right under the wire.
If we were on Easter time, we might not finish in time.
Well, you might say, I'd argue the week ends on Sunday. A lot of places would say that, it's a Monday to Sunday week, even though some places are Sunday to Monday. It's the weekend, right? But anyway,
but there's week bookends.
Yeah. But anyway, apologies for, having this out a little bit later than usual, but we still hope we have some good stuff for you that you'll find interesting. Yeah. Today, we are going over the Packers coaching hirings and firings since the last time we talked. All three positions have been filled, so we'll chat about that briefly. And then specifically, we'll be doing a deep dive into the Senior Bowl, why it matters for the Packers specifically, who stood out at the positions of need for Green Bay, whether that's offensive line, defensive line, corners, receivers. So we'll be doing a deep dive into that. Senior Bowl is always one of the most fun things to keep an eye on because we know the Packers love taking guys from that. But before we get into any of that, just a couple of pitches. If you like what you hear here, subscribe, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Blue Sky at Father-Son Packer. We put out episodes once a week during the whole offseason too. So just because the Packers season is done does not mean that we are done. We'll be talking about the draft like we're talking about with the Senior Bowl today. We'll be talking about the Combine when it comes up shortly, talking about free agency, talking about, OTAs, minicamp, training camp, preseason games. We'll be doing an episode a week for the entire offseason, so feel free to hang out with us, check that out. Honestly, I think the draft is my favorite part of the NFL season. NFL is a 365-day a year league, and it's not even done yet. We're already looking forward to the draft, which is really exciting. Which reminds me, Dad, who you got in the Super Bowl tomorrow? Since let's be a little bit topical at least.
Who do I have? Who
do you think's going to win?
I think it's most likely going to be the Chiefs, but I think I'll actually be rooting for the Beagles.
I think the Eagles are going to win. I think that,
you actually think they're going to win?
I think the Chiefs' run defense looked really susceptible against both Mixon and James Cook. They both kind of ran all over them. And Saquon's even better than that, and the Eagles' offensive line is even better than that. And I think that the Eagles have the best defense in the league, which plays a lot of zone, which could be really tough for, the Chiefs. But we're gonna see tomorrow. But, figure we touch on that. But like we said, if you like what you are hearing here today, feel free to subscribe, write a comment, leave a review, tell a friend. We'd really appreciate it. It would really help us out. But yeah, we'll be doing an episode a week for the entire offseason. It sounded like you wanted to throw in a couple more thoughts on the Super Bowl, though, Dad.
Well, I just say I didn't see how Cook performed against. I was too busy. I was on a beach.
Yeah,
with
just hanging out.
Week,
off service.
It was very right. No news.
Yep.
Of any kind?
I was going to say, not a bad way to be.
Yeah, it was not a bad way to be.
Yes, exactly.
Last week. So, yep, little whale watching, a little snorkeling,
a little R&R, a little reading,
some R&R.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway,
without any signal, I caught up on some of my reading.
Exactly. But before,
with your big brother Alex and these kids chasing hermit crabs and
good times. Before we get into any of the Senior Bowl stuff, though, like we mentioned, did have a couple of stuff, a bit of stuff to talk about with the coaching hirings and firings, specifically the hirings. So last week, Eli and I talked about, potential candidates for the job, whether or not they might, end up promoting internally with Ogabase at D-line or Dugan at linebacker or Mannion at quarterback coach. We were 2 out of 3 right, Dad. We got 2 out of 3 of those. So starting off with, the quarterbacks coach, they promoted Sean Mannion internally. He had, been not the assistant quarterback coach. He had been, a quality control coach who had helped out with the quarterbacks and had worked with the quarterbacks. And so he ends up taking that job. It's going to be his first real major head coaching job, which is going to be, real major coaching job, positional coaching job rather. So going to be a big test for him, working with Jordan Love, working with, the second highest paid quarterback in the entire league, following a legend in Tom Clements. Please enjoy your retirement, sir. You've done wonders on our franchise. And hopefully he can carry on in those footsteps. So that's number one. Number 2, Sean Dugan was promoted to linebacker coach. He was just a Packers defensive assistant last year, but he has a lot of experience working under Hafley. He was the linebacker coach under Hafley in Boston College from 2020 to 2022, and he was also the linebacker coach and co-defensive coordinator in Boston College in 2023 before following Hafley to Green Bay. So a lot of experience in this scheme, working with Hafley, knowing what he likes and doesn't like in his linebackers. So hopefully he can follow Campanile, who was very good for the Packers linebacker room this year. Career year out of Quay Walker, career year out of Eric Wilson, career year out of Isaiah McDuffie. Fantastic, all rookie season from Edgerrin Cooper. Going to be big shoes to fill, but, big shoes to fill with Clements, big shoes to fill with Campanile. So, good luck to both Mannion and Dugan. And then finally, for the one that was probably the most intriguing newsworthy-wise, was the Packers hired DeMarcus Covington as their defensive line coach. He was the defensive coordinator for the Patriots last season. Gerard Mayo, their head coach, was let go, so that position was filled by someone else as Mike Vrabel went in and took that head coaching job in New England. Some stuff on Covington. He was the DC for the Patriots, like I said. Before that, though, he was the defensive line coach from 2020 to 2023 with the Patriots, so some experience, 4 seasons as a defensive line coach there. Over those 4 years, though, bit of a struggle for the Patriots defensive line. On average, over those 4 years, they ranked 14th in pressure rate, 27th in time to pressure, 30th in time to throw, and those numbers are all on non-blitzes per NFL Pro, so taking out any blitz snaps, so just trying to isolate what the defensive line is doing snap to snap. And then they were 28th in stuff rate in the run game, which is, getting a stop, at or behind the line of scrimmage. And then 13th in yards before contact per attempt on average over those 4 years. So not the best performance from the defensive line, with some decent investment given the fact, Barmore had, heavily invested in him. Godshaw heavily invested in him, had Matthew Judon prior to this season for several years there. Hopefully he can do better in Green Bay. Everyone talks about how everyone who has talked about him, there are quotes from Barmore, quotes from, I believe it was Godshaw, talking about how they believe he'll be a head coach one day, just really commanding in a room, garners a lot of people's respect despite being so young. And he's had like a meteoric rise through the coaching ranks, is pretty much went from a grad assistant, I think it was back in like 2015, 2014, and was already a defensive coordinator as recently as 2024, which is like a meteoric rise. But hopefully the Packers defensive line can find some improvement and be better than those Patriots defensive lines have been. But Dad, any thoughts on Mannion, Dugan, or Covington coming in?
So I guess Mannion and Dugan were kind of in some ways expected, and Mannion's been a guy that people have been expecting to be a quarterback coach pretty quickly. It has this look. He's like he's 9 years younger than Aaron Rodgers.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
And then Dugan, I think I'm hoping for a nice transition there, since he's worked with Hafley in the past and knows what Hafley wants, and now has had a chance to work under Campanile. And the other thing about Campanile, it's maybe not a surprise because he got some DC interviews the last time around. Yeah. It's not surprising we didn't have him for very long.
Yeah. Yeah, he had gotten some.
It was nice to have him. Wish we could have kept him. It really was looking good in the linebacker room under it. And then, so Covington, I guess we'll see what he can do. One thing, you're talking about the blitz rate. One thing I don't know is, like, did they blitz a lot? In terms of like just what kind of scheme we might be expecting in terms of strategy.
I don't think a defensive line coach impacts how much you blitz. I would not be making those calls. I don't think that's really going to be anything he has any impact over. So the only reason I took out blitzes, because my thought was just like, okay, if you're getting a high pressure rate, but a lot of it is blitzes, that doesn't really have anything to do with the defensive line. So I just took all the snaps out that had blitzes in them, and then just looked at what the defensive line was trying to isolate the defensive line.
How well are the individual defensive linemen performing?
Exactly. Yeah, not even just the individual defensive line, but
as a group, but
just as a unit. Yeah, more so.
But the player performance as opposed to scheme.
Well, more so just like, hey, if they're blitzing a lot, we're just trying to look at the defensive line. So when they're rushing 4, are they getting home? Are they getting home quickly? Are the opposing quarterbacks allowed to hold the ball for a long time before that pressure gets there, or just in general? Are you hitting guys behind the line as a defensive line unit? Are you beating your blocks and, getting guys in the backfield? Are running backs able to run for a long distance before, are they running backs consistently getting to the second level? Stuff like that, where it's like trying to look at exactly what the defensive line is doing there. And for the most part, wasn't great with the Patriots. Hopefully it can be better with the Packers. But yeah, anything else on the coaching staff you wanted to touch on, though, before we get to talking about the Senior Bowl?
That's it for the coaching staff. There's a little bit more news in terms of quotes.
Yes, that's true. We do have one other piece of news, which was, I figured we should touch on it.
This became a much bigger storm than it needed to be.
Yeah, it didn't really matter to me, but since so many people are talking about it, I figure we might as well touch on Josh Jacobs' comments at the Super Bowl, specifically talking about, how he thinks that the Packers need,
row or whatever they call it.
Yeah, how the Packers need 2 or 3 moves, specifically a wide receiver 1. But Dad, I think you have the exact quote, right?
So the quote, and the thing is, he talked to multiple people over the day. So one thing I got from 97.3 The Game, what he said was, we've got a really young group of receivers. All can be really, really special. But I think personally, we need a guy that's proven to be a number 1 already. And then I've had some talks with Tay. And so, of course, people were bringing up Davante Adams repeatedly. He also said, I think we need another D end, and I think we need another DB. Then he spoke to Kay Adams. She asked him if he would welcome Davante Adams to Green Bay. And he said, most definitely. Said that twice. And then later he kind of doubled down on the wide receiver comments when he spoke to Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers. Where to add a little bit of context to what he meant, he mentioned that, they're likely to be without Christian Watson until late in the season. So that you think in that context, you would want to add somebody because you're missing somebody, as opposed to the furor is over whether he's casting shade, right?
Yeah. Well, also, I don't know if you saw Dontavian Wicks' response, which it sounds like you might have missed.
I heard about his response with many emojis and.
Yes, there were 2 different comments. There was one on Instagram calling it this guy is some BS. And that's not a direct quote, but a paraphrase of that. And then one that was a bunch of laughing emojis and a bunch of thumbs down emojis. So take with that what you will. Josh Jacobs is a leader in the locker room. Dontavian Wicks is a young guy who had, a bit of a sophomore slump. You hate to see any kind of division being sown in the locker room by comments that are not. No one's making you say these things, Josh Jacobs, just because you're right. No one's making you say this stuff.
Right. That's the other thing is it's kind of the consensus amongst most people speaking in the offseason for
he's
fans.
He's not wrong, but
and content creators.
He's
not wrong, but maybe he could be a little more diplomatic.
Well, yeah, and the quotes aren't that bad, but it's more just it's a tough balance where it's by saying this stuff, it could go, some ways towards recruiting some players. There's a chance for that, but also at the same time going the other way, how it's going to be interpreted and possibly interpreted within the locker room as well. So, I guess we'll see. But also it's he's not wrong. So just everyone in the locker room, maybe it'll light a fire underneath them. Maybe it'll make them play even harder, drive even harder. But that's obviously the optimistic view. Hopefully, it's just, water under the bridge.
Different players need a different style of coaching.
Yeah, we'll see.
And this is leading, different style, need different kinds of leadership to get them motivated.
Exactly. And hopefully this will all be, for the better. And hopefully it'll, result in maybe recruiting some, more receivers to the team. I know he mentioned specifically hey, if Davante Adams wants to come back, wouldn't hate it. And I wouldn't hate it either. But anyway.
Treading a fine line between tampering and not tampering.
I know, it's just funny because he is on a roster right now. He's not a free agent. Everyone's talking he's available. He's not available. He's under contract.
He's interested in the Packers. Oh, maybe he'll go to Packers.
I saw
he wants to go to the West Coast. He wants to go to California.
Back to the West Coast.
The Niners, the Rams, or the Chargers. It's all over the place.
It's you're still on the
Jets. Everybody's talking about it like he's already a free agent.
Yeah, it's
nobody expects him to play for $38.5 million
or whatever
his cap number would be.
Insane number. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, Dad, enough with the news. Let's start talking about what we really came here to talk about, which is the Senior Bowl. And you might wonder, why are we dedicating an entire episode to the Senior Bowl? It's it's an all-star game in a lot of ways. Well, the real draw is the practices. And you might be wondering, why did I say it was so important for the Packers specifically? Well, the real reason it's so important for the Packers specifically is because they love taking players from the Senior Bowl. Just last year, 8 of the Packers' 11 draft picks went to the Senior Bowl in some facet. You know, the game itself does not really matter. It's an all-star game. They're not going all the way out. It's the practices that are really important. And specifically for Green Bay, they were very involved in the practices this year. The Packers passing game coordinator, Jason Vrabel, was the offensive coordinator of the American team. Also, defensive quality control coach Wendell Davis coached the American team linebackers and edge rushers. So they had several coaches, present actually coaching the players. And then several, every team sends like a big group of scouts. Even the GMs will go. I think like every GM except for, I think, Veach and Roseman, who are, obviously a little bit focused on a big game coming up. We're at this one.
Yeah. More pressing matters.
Exactly. But even they sent their second in commands for that. But so it's really important for the Packers. They take a lot of Senior Bowl guys every year. Last year they took 8 of 11. The year before, Musgrave was a Senior Bowl guy. Jaden Reed was a Senior Bowl guy. Et cetera, et cetera.
Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs were both Senior Bowl guys.
Years prior to that, exactly. It's a common place that the Packers seem to love to take players from, and so it's really important to focus on. And so we really decided that we wanted to focus on the players in positions of need at the Senior Bowl that the Packers might be targeting. So we're going to look a little bit at the offensive line, the defensive line, the corners, and the receivers in this one. Each of us charted. So I charted all the offensive line and defensive line 1v1s that I could find. You charted all the wide receiver and corner 1v1s that you could find. Looked at who won, at the highest rate, who had good reps, who had bad reps, who showed some versatility, who looked good, et cetera, et cetera. But Dad, let's get started though I'll start on my side. We'll start on the offensive line and who looked good there. In terms of standouts, I have 3 different standouts for each position. I don't know how many you ended up doing. But I went through, like I said, I charted every single 1v1 and who won, who lost, where they lined up. Some of the standouts, the first one was Anthony Belton, who is a tackle out of North Carolina State. He took snaps at both left and right tackle at the Senior Bowl. He is right now consensus 103rd on the big board, the consensus big board, that is. I had him winning 7 of his 8 reps. They also played him a little bit at guard. And this is from you. They also at these, Senior Bowls have something called Zebra Tech, which measures on-field play speed. Maybe not quite as relevant for offensive and defensive linemen as it is for corners and receivers, but still very interesting nonetheless. He had above average speed and elite acceleration and deceleration amongst these 77 tackles at the Senior Bowl. So good athletes as well. I would say
you might think that the max acceleration that they measure could be relevant for like how explosive you are as an offensive lineman.
Very true.
I should say for these numbers, I have collected all of the Senior Bowl on-field measurements and have it made a database of all whatever it is now, 7 or 8 years of all players. So this is
so that's all of 77 all-time Senior Bowl tackles.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Over since I think it might be 2018.
Yeah.
So the database of everybody who they've released on-field speed scores for.
Yeah.
And so, and then kind of ranked similarly to the way, if you're familiar with RAS, you got your elite green, your above average, yellow, and your below average red, and great people the same way. So whether they're elite, above average, or below average.
Yeah. And so he is, like you mentioned, above average speed, elite acceleration and deceleration. I really liked what I saw out of him at tackle. And they were playing him on both sides, so showed some versatility as well. Next player who was a standout to me, and a standout to a lot of people, was lineman Gray Zabel. He's an interior lineman out of North Dakota State. Now, he played left tackle at North Dakota State, but at the Senior Bowl, they only had him playing along the interior. He did take snaps at all of left guard, right guard, and center. He is 43rd on the consensus big board. Several people actually thought that he was overall the best player at the Senior Bowl, regardless of position. Many people were like, I thought he was the winner of the week. I charted him as winning 10 of his 13 reps, showed a lot of versatility and movement skills, being able to play 3 places along the interior, despite, playing left tackle his last year at North Dakota State. So not his natural position at all, and yet still playing all along the interior and playing there quite well. Showed, good recovery ability in terms of, when he was pushed back, he was able to, reset pretty well. Showed pretty good strength along the interior as well. And he had, like you mentioned, via Zebra Tech, above average speed and deceleration and elite acceleration amongst the 79 Senior Bowl interior offensive linemen. And then the final one that I thought was a standout was Emory Jones, who's a tackle out of LSU. Took all of his snaps at right tackle, didn't take any at left tackle, but he is 76th on the consensus big board. I had him winning 6 of his 8 reps. Good athlete, good anchor, above average speed, below average acceleration and deceleration among 77 Senior Bowl tackles. On-field tracking, rather, is, in my opinion, more important than the combine, although we will get an even, more intense look at their athletic profiles at the combine with, the jumps, the 40-yard dash, bench press, the agility drills, broad jump, vertical jump, like I already mentioned. But, kind of an early sneak peek into their athleticism. And then I did have 2 honorable mentions. The first was Jalen Rivers, who's an interior lineman out of Miami. I thought he looked fantastic the first day, and I was like, oh my goodness, this guy is awesome. And then he had a really bad day too, in my opinion. But the first day, they were playing him all along the line and along the interior. He was stonewalling everyone he went against, and then the second day he really fizzled out. But maybe just a bad day, or maybe just a good day. I guess we'll see. And then Miles Frazier, interior offensive lineman at LSU, did well in the limited reps that I saw. Only had him for about 5 reps. But yeah, did well in those. But anyway, so that's all I had for the offensive linemen. Dan, any thoughts on any of those? Or should we go on to the wide receivers that you were taking a look at?
I like some of the things that you're talking about. I haven't had a chance to look at the offensive versus defensive line reps yet, but players who've shown some versatility, like Zabel, who's played like all over the line, and his ability to play tackle but kick inside. Mm-hmm. This kind of thing we've seen a bunch of times before.
It's what the Packers love to do. They love drafting tackles and moving them to guard, moving them to center. That or mostly guard, but they just did it with Morgan last year. It sounds like he's going to be a guard going forward. Although I guess we'll see this offseason. And Morgan was, a versatile guy at the Senior Bowl last year. So yeah, and you can go down and down the list. I think Josh Sitton was a tackle before he moved to guard. You could just keep going and going and going. But they love those
Ryan
versatile
was
guys.
A tackle before going to guard.
He was also a guard in college though. Like he wasn't. I just meant like college tackles who moved to guard in the NFL. But you're right. That's another one where he was, whatchamacallit? I guess the other way, Zach Tom was a center who moved to tackle.
Zach Tom was, I guess,
the opposite direction.
The reverse, where he's moving out from the center.
Exactly. Just this past year, they took Travis Glover.
But he also played some tackle in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but just this past year, they took Travis Glover, who, collegiate left tackle, and it seems like they have him pegged as a guard only going forward. So, a lot of love for that versatility in the Packers, front office along the offensive line. But staying on the offensive side of the football, though, Dad, moving on to wide receivers versus corners, what receivers stood out to you in this Senior Bowl? We already talked about Packers have already taken, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jaden Reed. So they already have at least 3 Senior Bowl guys on the roster at receiver. I'm trying to think if either Heath or Bo Melton were at the Senior Bowl, or Wicks. Wicks was not.
Wicks was.
Oh, was he?
And Grant DuBose was.
Oh, I knew DuBose was, yes.
Yeah, DuBose and Wicks were both at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, so we know they love their Senior Bowl receivers.
And Bo Melton was at the Senior Bowl too.
Okay, so we're pretty much every single one of them. But anyway, so we know they love their Senior Bowl receivers. Who stood out there?
Yeah, so just to go over the process, I looked at the 1v1 reps, wide receiver. Well, actually, it's like pass catchers versus defensive backs. So as the videos I looked at were a mix of wide receivers and tight ends against corners and safeties. I've set aside the tight ends for now. I used a compilation video from Couch Potato General Manager showing the 1v1s from 3 different days of practice, both for the American team and national team. Thank you.
Yeah, and I should shout out Scott Kennedy's YouTube channel for having all the offensive linemen and defensive linemen 1v1s clipped up. Thank you to him.
Yeah, and so I got a total of 123 reps involving wide receivers. The videos included 17 wide receivers and 16 cornerbacks, plus another 3 safeties who went against wide receivers as well. Mostly the safeties went against tight ends, but there are a few safeties who they also had go against wide receivers. Overall, by the compilation, I was basically trying to call a win as well as how they won, whether the defensive backs were playing press man, playing tight to line or back, and how they won. But overall, wide receivers had 67 wins. Defensive backs had 35 wins, and then there are 21s I called draws. So either
so
they both did something well, or they both did something poorly.
But the takeaway there is
anybody credit.
The takeaway there is that the 1v1s are skewed for receivers.
It's tough on those corners. You're out on an island, and there is no help anyway. You can't push
And there's no pass rush.
There's no pass rush.
And they can just run forever. It does, like they could just keep running that route for an hour. So,
but overall, if you like have wins versus non-wins, include the draws with that it's like more wide receiver wins than non-wins. So out of the players, there are 13 wide receivers who had at least 5 reps. And so I'll go by who was winning most frequently. The top 2 wide receivers in these reps were Tez Johnson with 7 wins out of 9 reps and then 2 draws, so no losses. He's currently 87th on the consensus big board at NFL Mock Draft Database. He is, however, only 5'9" and 156 pounds at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, that might be prohibitive to being drafted.
But he had the highest
win
rate of anybody.
Yeah.
The last 2 years at Oregon, 1,182 yards and 898 yards. In both years, over an 81% catch percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Those numbers are fantastic.
If he had, just better genes in terms of height and weight, he'd be a superstar. But he's if you thought Tank Dell was small, for reference, Tank Dell was 5'8" and 3/4 and 163 pounds. So this guy is about an inch taller and almost 10 pounds lighter. He is tiny, very small, like Tutu Atwell, smaller than Tutu Atwell practically.
And then for the on-field speed measurements, he was 22nd out of 103 wide receivers all time at the Senior Bowl, and with a below average acceleration and above average deceleration. So maybe some good startability, and though these things are always a little funky in terms of how much you get in the open field in terms of like open it up all the way for your top speed, or I think the acceleration deceleration probably come in on more of the individual reps. Then the next best performer was Jalen Royals with 8 wins out of 11 reps. I had 3 losses. He's 81st on the consensus board. He's measured at 5'11", 210 pounds. And in his last 2 years at Utah State, he had 1,084 yards and 839 yards this last year, but in only 7 games. So averaging, almost 120 yards a game, with a catch percentages of 71% and 68%. Now, the one thing about Jalen Rose is he is near the bottom of the of the measurements in on-field speed, 99th out of 103 wide receivers. At the Senior Bowl.
You were not kidding about near the bottom. That is very near the bottom.
Right. But he did score in the top half in both acceleration and deceleration.
Okay.
So we'll see what the numbers come out in the
combine.
At the combine. Because sometimes it may be that the top speed players don't reach it in the reps given. But it's though you see that maybe more with like offensive linemen. Like, there's no reason in a lot of plays for them to like get into a full sprint. So we'll see how that looks, and when he gets to the combine, if that changes the on-field, the high-end speed. Though I think the deceleration and acceleration are probably, within a reasonable proximity of the true numbers, the full numbers. And then the third performer that I had was, for my own counts, was Xavier Restrepo. He had 6 wins out of 8 reps. He's 84th in the consensus board. He's 5'9", 200. So none of these guys is over 6 feet. A couple of them are 200 pounds.
5'9", 200 is like big enough though. Like he's short, but he's not a small man.
Right, but probably the Packers might see somebody that size as a slot receiver.
Yeah.
He did have over 1,100 yards and a catch percentage of over 71%, both of the last 2 years. So those are good. Packers always like production. So all 3 of these guys have actually had good production as well, which kind of matches what the Packers always usually pick players who have had production in college. But he was also his top on-field speed was only 88th in the group out of 103. So also not high. But he was elite in both acceleration and deceleration on the field, but top 20% in both of those.
Yeah, and you didn't mention, but he is a Miami Hurricane, which was one thing I wanted to mention there.
Now, players who had little kind of flags on them, Ty Felton had the lowest win rate with only 2 out of 7 reps, followed by Chimere Dike and Isaac Tesla, who both only had 4 wins out of 10 reps. So they were losing more than they were winning, which is
not ideal.
Below the median, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, rough days for them, but rough Senior Bowls for them rather. But yeah, in terms of the guys that you mentioned though, Tez Johnson, I think he's just going to be too small for the Packers.
So skinny that
so
Gutekunst
small.
will just not pick him.
I think he might not even look at him. I think he might actually be invisible. I don't think his eyes
he's too
are
skinny for me to see.
His eyes are incapable.
He's like a piece of paper turned sideways.
Exactly. He's two-dimensional. Yeah, he's literally I think he is actually going to be just too small for the Packers to consider him. Royals, on the other hand, was a guy that I think a lot of people were talking about, this past week post Senior Bowl as a guy who they view as a major riser after this, all-star showing in camp and overall, practice showing. I think it is going to maybe be dependent a bit on how he looks at the Combine. I don't think the Combine invitations have been announced yet. I don't know if we know all the people that are going to the Combine yet.
I have not heard, but I think it's true that some people make it because of how they do at the Senior Bowl.
That is, yeah,
right? That people can move up into getting an invite that they might not have gotten otherwise.
Yeah, so we're going to see. I don't think that we know if he's going to be at the Combine, but that could be huge for him given the fact that, like you mentioned, he didn't, test in the on-field speed very well. And then finally, for Restrepo, at that size, he might be a slot-only guy. What are your thoughts on because the question there is, do they view Reed as a slot-only guy? Because then I think they might just not be interested in Restrepo.
That's they might not want another player already in that same mold. I haven't actually looked at whether Restrepo has done a lot of as a ball carrier, handoffs, running plays, as some gadget guy ability. But I would say at least the first half of the year, there's a stretch where they were treating Reed like he was a slot only guy. And they weren't getting him on the field in 2 receiver sets, even though they said, "Oh yeah, we got to get to that more."
Yeah, and just so you it's like, oh, just because he's built like that, like maybe he's not a slot guy. I just double checked. 644 of his 700 snaps were all in the slot. So this past season, so he is pretty much a slot only guy. Yeah, exactly. And also I will say these one-on-one drills are, I think at times, it seems like the slot guys just do better than them.
Well, it is like the coverage is kind of like being in a slot where you can go either you got a two-way go. Yeah. There is no help.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I do wonder about their interest in him just as in terms of they might just be like, okay, we have Reed in the slot. We don't run that many 4 receiver sets. I think we're okay. So I guess we'll see. But Royals is definitely the one of those that intrigues me the most in terms of Packers fits. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball. Are you ready to talk about maybe some defensive linemen? Some
I would
some
love
cavalry.
To be talking about some defensive linemen next year, wrecking the league for the Pack on the Packers' behalf. That is,
we need some defensive line help, and hopefully, the Packers are able to.
And I guess by defensive line, we're including
edges as well.
Edge rushers.
Yes. But so I mentioned, watched. I forgot to mention exactly how many, but I watched 147 reps of offensive versus defensive linemen from this one, and I'm mostly looking at guys who had more than 5 reps, just so we get at least some sample size. But amongst the players, that I watched and was able to watch at least 5 reps of. I had 3 that really stood out. The first was Jamari Caldwell, who's an interior defensive lineman from Oregon. He is currently 188th on the consensus big board. I had him winning 6 out of 7 reps. A lot of power and size and some explosion at that size. You have here from the Zebra Tech stuff, below average on-field speed, but elite max acceleration, the highest ever out of 80 defensive linemen all time at the Senior Bowl. And let me tell you, you could see it on film. He was really quick out of his stance along the interior defensive line. Gave some guys a lot of trouble with just getting up on them, I think, faster than they thought he was going to. He was really, really intriguing there. Another guy who I thought really showed out was Oluwafemi Oladejo, who's an edge rusher from UCLA. 187th on the consensus big board. I had him winning 5 of 7 reps. Looked really raw, but really well built for his size, long, and just athletic, very athletic. Below average speed, but above average acceleration and deceleration amongst 85 edge rushers from Senior Bowl and on-field measurements. Seems like a guy who, you might take as a bit of a project in the 3rd round and just see what happens. But he had a couple of like very nice bendy moments for his size and quickness, specifically around the edge. So he was very interesting. And then the final one was Darius Alexander, interior pass rusher from Toledo. 72nd on the consensus big board. A lot of people had him as one of the major winners of the week. Coming from a small school program, these all-star games are, especially good for those guys who get to go against, more NFL ready competition than maybe they got to put on tape during the course of the season. I had him winning 4 of 6 reps. They lined him up. They lined him up on the interior and on the edge, so showed some versatility there. Super explosive. He has elite speed and elite max acceleration. Top 20% out of 80 all-time defensive linemen in both. He was very, very, very impressive as well. To a lot of people coming out of that Senior Bowl week, was really a highlight of the event. Some others that, were interesting to me. Mike Green out of Tulane had a couple of really impressive reps. He really flashed on a couple of reps. There's one where he this clip was going around before I even looked at him. So I saw this clip like at the start of the Senior Bowl, where he just takes Josh Connerly, who was like one of the higher thought of tackles coming into this event, and puts him right on his ass, like instantaneously runs him over. It's a very fun clip to watch. I encourage you to go find it. But he had a couple other impressive reps as well. He came in bigger than people expected. I think he came in at around 250 pounds, where people thought he was more like 240, and didn't lose any of that burst. I think he's going to tear up the combine. So he had a couple of really awesome flash reps. Overall, I think he was a guy who seemed to be trying to prove he could bull rush dudes, and mixed results. I think if he had just tried to do speed the whole time, he would have won more often. But he didn't, so I didn't have him in my top 3. Another guy who I thought stood out was Barron Sorrell out of Texas. I thought he had some nice burst and some nice reps. He had one where he really got Emory Jones, who was one of the guys who really stood out to me at tackle. He smoked him. It was like one of those 1v1s where everyone was watching. It was the end of practice and everyone was around them. They did 3. Sorrell smoked him on the first one, and then Jones got him the next 2. And then the final is Donovan Ezeraku out of Boston College. Continues to intrigue me. Super long, not very tall. I think he's like 6'2", but really long arms and really athletic. So those 3 guys are some honorable mentions of guys that I was taking a look at. But like we've mentioned, the Packers need defensive line help. I forgot to mention earlier, the Packers need offensive line help. We talked about that in our 2025 needs, that, in a year they're going to have no starters left along the offensive line under contract. But yeah, so I think that there were definitely some standouts, specifically some interior defensive line standouts, but also some edge rushers that showed some promise.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to say about Caldwell, I was looking it up while you were talking about. So he had the highest ever acceleration for interior defensive lineman, and he weighs 342 pounds.
Yeah, he looked big and explosive and powerful. It was impressive. And it was like the only guy not out there in shorts. He was wearing sweatpants the whole time, which I don't know. Just figured I'd throw that in there.
How hot is it? Is
Mobile, Alabama?
Where there was mobile. What is he used to?
He plays for Oregon, so it can't be right. There was that cold snap in the South. Maybe it was cold. Maybe it was cold that week. But yeah, so he was definitely a standout though. Any other thoughts on any of those guys? Have you gotten a chance to look at them yet specifically?
I haven't had a chance to watch them yet. But I was thinking about, you're talking about the arm length for Zeruaku. It's like 34 and a half inches.
So his arms are
that's nice edge rusher length.
Yeah. That's absurd edge rusher length.
And I think there's been a decent amount of buzz around Green at least after the Senior Bowl. I don't know if it was before.
Green's a guy that before too. I think he was one where, oh goodness, I can't remember who it was. If it was Daniel Jeremiah or Dane Brugler, were I think he's going to be a first rounder, and that was before the Senior Bowl. And I don't think the Senior Bowl did anything to change that. So we'll see.
Yeah, but some of these, if the consensus board is right, we might be able to get some flyers in some mid rounds.
Mm-hmm. It's a strong edge class. They're what was it? Oh goodness, we did it last week. There's 6 or 7 guys who are projected, top 32 in the consensus big board right now at edge. There's a lot of edge rushers.
I think it's a draft that the Packers maybe will take another first round edge rusher.
Yeah, could be a first round edge, but there's always a chance we also go first round corner. There are a lot of needs along the defense, all over the defense, even though, which is weird because I would say our defense was much more impressive at the end of the year than our offense was. So I don't know, but anyway, I'm just transitioning you into talking about the corners, Dad. Who stood out along that defensive backs group?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on there is this consensus that our pass rush was good enough, our corner room doesn't look deep enough, and yet
the defense was not the problem.
Defense was able to figure it out, right?
Yeah,
defense was
not the problem in that playoff game.
There's also this like maybe we're okay, we could get by, and we'll
I don't
invest
know.
like crazy on the offense. But
offense.
There's lots of different ways to go.
It's an offensive-driven league. I wouldn't hate it. But anyway, defensive backs who looked good in these 1v1s.
So the same tape, the same reps, same formula for where the wide receivers are winning more than they're losing or stalemating. There were 13 cornerbacks who had at least 5 reps. The best of these in terms of win percentage was Mac McWilliams, who only gave up 3 wins to wide receivers out of 10 reps. So he was actually holding his own more often than he was losing. As opposed to the average cornerbacks were losing, 2/3 of the time or more. He's only 268th on the consensus big board.
Well, when you say his height and weight, I think we're going to know why.
Well, he's 5'10", 181.
That's pretty small.
Could be worse.
That's pretty small, though.
Yeah. He had an 84.8 coverage grade from PFF last year and a 70.1 passer rating against, according to PFF from Central Florida. Now his speed, he's only 86 in the on-field speed out of 90 cornerbacks and below average in acceleration and above average in deceleration. So he's figured it out. We'll see how it does overall. And the combine, how his overall athleticism measures up. And then the next best in terms of win percentage was Upton Stout. He only gave up 5 wins out of 14 reps, so 9 non-wins to wide receivers. He's 164th on the consensus big board, and even smaller, 5'8", 178.
Tiny.
His PFF coverage grade was 78.3 last year for West Kentucky, and a 96 passer rating against, but better other years for passer rating against. He was kind of middle of the pack, 40th out of 90 quarterbacks in on-field speed. Below average acceleration, but elite deceleration. So, stopping on a dime, as it were, and changing direction. And so those were the 2 who had the best total of reps in their favor. And then
you just had to include the worst, huh? Yeah, and this guy was awful.
I did that for both. But I also
for the other one, you at least had multiple. For this one, you were just like, this one guy did not have a good day.
Yeah, so I've just mentioned this one guy, Tommy Hill, because he had 6 reps, but lost all 6 of them. I mean, it wasn't a great day for him.
Not great.
So yeah, every single one of the reps I saw was a win for the wide receiver, and against 1, 2, 3 different wide receivers.
Yeah. And not a great day, but not a great, week, that is. But, just because you have a bad Senior Bowl doesn't mean it's over for you. Just last year, you can look at Kalen King, had a terrible Senior Bowl, one of the worst Senior Bowls I've seen. Still ended up getting drafted, still stuck around on the Packers practice squad the entire year. A lot of people are really still excited about Kalen King as a prospect and really want to see him, get some more reps, get some more opportunities. Now, I still think he's clearly 5th, maybe 4th, maybe 5th guy in that corner room. I still wouldn't have him ahead of any of the guys we have had playing. But just because you have a bad Senior Bowl doesn't mean it's over for you. But yeah, tough one for Tommy Hill. Tough one. Anything else on the corner side you wanted to highlight, or should we wrap things up?
I didn't have too much else to say. I'd say some guys were a little bit better at, and this is something I don't have the numbers on. Some are more aggressively trying to sort of bump and run, jam at the line.
Yep.
Others did not get their hands up and just let the wide receivers start what they were going to do and then try to mirror and catch up.
I prefer the first kind at least, but yeah, fair enough. It's different.
And sometimes it worked. And there were other things that I came across where, on day 3, there was more of a red zone sort of vibe to what they're doing, the 10 and 5 yard line, and both from the wide receiver perspective and from the cornerback perspective. Some players definitely were doing better on day 3 than others.
Yeah, probably a little easier on the corners, given that you have a little less space you need to cover.
Right. You don't have to worry about getting beat. And then some wide receivers did better on on that last day with the red zone. I think one of them being like Jack. Is it Beck?
Out of TCU. He's a guy who a lot of people had as a riser after this week as well.
And his best day was the red zone day.
Kind of makes sense because he's one of those bigger. He's not very
big guy.
He's not very athletic. He's mostly just size and a lot of contested catch stuff, which in the red zone is more what you want. But yeah, so this has been kind of a bit of a first look at a lot of prospects for us and for the league. Looking at how these guys go against top level, also NFL prospect level competition, and a really good look at guys that the Packers probably have their eye on as well, as they had a bunch of guys coaching there this week. And like we already mentioned, they love taking Senior Bowl guys. So this has been a bit of a Packers-centric look into the Senior Bowl, looking at the offensive line, the defensive line, the wide receivers, and the corners, as those are probably the biggest positions of need for Green Bay, and also the positions that, in my opinion, you can glean the most out of during a Senior Bowl week. I think it's hard to get much out of running backs or linebackers because there's not a lot of full contact stuff. So it's you don't really gain as much there. But like we mentioned, good to look at all these things. And like we mentioned before, if you like what you heard, please subscribe, whether that's Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Leave a review, leave a comment. We'll be here every single week. Once again, apologies for having this out late this week. We had some timing issues with travel, et cetera, but we'll be back to doing these more in the middle of the week going forward. Hope everyone enjoys the Super Bowl tomorrow. Hope, whether the team you're rooting for wins or loses, hope you have a good time. I'm just hoping it's going to be a good game.
Right. Good game. Enjoy the experience. Eat whatever your Super Bowl feast of choice is.
Maybe some guacamole, some buffalo dip. I can't be thinking about food too much. I still haven't eaten dinner. But anyway, like we mentioned, thank you again.
Don't start making your Super Bowl food tonight.
Yeah.
Unless it takes all.
I was going to say, unless you want to
smoke something overnight.
I was going to say, smoke some ribs overnight. That could be very good. That could be very good food for a Super Bowl. But anyway, like I mentioned, let's stop talking about food. Anyway, thank you again so much for listening. We'll be back again next week talking more about these prospects, talking more about looking forward for the Packers offseason. But until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.